If you've ever used an 1176 compressor, you'll know just how magic these things are within a mix. So I'm going to take you through a couple of examples of how I like to use an 1176 within my mixes. So if you're working on a mix with a kick that sounds a little bit too soft for what you want to hear a little bit more knock and punch to the kick sound, maybe even bring out a little bit more sustain, then try these settings with an 1176 on your kick or your kick sum bus, where all your kicks and samples are going to, which is what we're going to do right here. So our peak volume between those two examples was pretty much the same. So it sounds louder, more aggressive. We can hear a bit more of that mid-range knock to the kick, a bit more punch. The low end is a little bit more subdued, but there's a bit more sustain and rumble to the sound. For this example, we're going to be adding some 1176 to our snare drum. Now we're going to be using it on our snare bus, where all of our close mics and our snare samples are being sent. This is going to bring out some of the room sound in our snare samples. It's also going to keep the sound really consistent and our level on the snare really consistent as well. It's going to add a little bit of grit and sustain to the sound. So check this out. So when the 1176 was turned off, the peak volume was actually louder, but it sounded softer. So a really great way of reining in the dynamics of your snare and adding some slam to it. If you guys are enjoying this video, make sure you hit that like button right now. Let's say the cymbals from your overhead mics are not really coming through. They're a bit unbalanced. Some are louder than others. You just got a fairly uneven performance on the cymbals and you need to try and balance this out a little bit more. Try an 1176 on your overheads. Be gentle, just a little bit. It's going to help bring these cymbals to life. So check this out. So you could hear when the compressor was engaged, the hi-hat sounded a little bit more exciting and a little bit more consistent. The cymbals didn't really drop in and out, they just flowed through nicely. Now another classic way of using an 1176 is on your room mics with drums. You can just smash these, bring out some big sustain in your room sounds, make them sound larger than life. We're going to put this at the very end of our room mic channel strip. This is just a single mono room mic. It's got a bit of a stereo reverb applied to it. And we're going to put this at the end so it makes the reverb react pretty crazily. Makes them sound aggressive. You do have to be careful with this because you can bring out a lot of cymbals. So play around with it, even play around with the release time. If that fast attack and fast release is too aggressive, maybe try rolling back that release time so that the cymbals don't come as forward as fast. Another classic use for 1176 compression is on parallel compression on your drums. Depending on the attack and release times, you can create some different effects with this. You can either add more punch to your drum sound if you use a slow attack, or if you use a fast attack, you can crush the drums and add more sustain. So check this out. For this one, we're going to go for a slow attack, fast release, and we're going to add a bit more punch and attack to our drum sound. So the slow attack's letting the transient through to give us that punch, but the fast release is giving us a little bit of sustain as well. So it's just making these drums sound massive. Now this is mostly just kick, snare, and toms, a little bit of cymbals in there, and then we blend this in with our kit like so. Pretty cool. Add some nice aggression to our drum sound. Let's have a listen to what it sounds like if we go fast attack, fast release. So it's mostly just adding some big sustain to the sound. There's not as much punch and attack on those transients. Let's do the same thing, blend it in and see what it does to the drum sound. Pretty night and day, makes these drums sound huge with that sustain. 1176 and bass guitars can really go well hand in hand together, especially if you're tracking DI and you need to even out the signal a little bit. You can have a look at this one up here. You can see it's pretty dynamic. We've got softs, louds. We really need to get this bass in check. Have a listen to the first half without the compressor on, and then have a listen to it when we kick it in, how much more consistent the levels of the bass sound. So you can see it's working way harder on those big notes. It's working a little bit on the soft notes. And that's what you want to see. You want to see the compressor kind of always working, even on those soft notes, just a little bit of the needle moving. And then when it hits the harder stuff, it's going to pull it back down. And all those louds and softs are going to get reined in together. This is a fairly rocky, heavy kind of song. We don't need a huge dynamic range on the bass. We want to keep it consistent. So electric guitars can be a fun one to add a little bit of 1176 compression to. If it's a fairly distorted guitar signal, you're not going to need a ton of compression on it. But sometimes I like to use the Rev A version to add a little bit of extra grit to the sound, a little bit of saturation in those upper mids, and a slow attack with a fast release to add a little bit more punch to the transients, especially when there's cuts in the song and the guitar comes back in. You really feel it smack with that slow attack on it. So we've got two guitars here, pan hard left and right. These are just DIs with an amp sim on them. So you could hear when the compressor was engaged, every time the guitar came back in after those stops, had this really nice punchy attack sound to it. And that's because we've got the slow attack, and when it comes through, it grabs it and just adds this little bit of aggression to the sound. Makes it sound like it's punching in a little bit harder. Sounds pretty good to me. So it's keeping all those fast runs as well, nice and even and consistent and up front of the mix. All right, let's have a look at vocals. If you look at any of my mixes, I pretty much always have an 1176 on my vocals, 9 times out of 10. Any situation where you need your vocal to be nice and upfront and in your face, 1176 is going to do the job for you. Now, depending what kind of tone you want will depend if you reach for the Rev A or the Rev E compressor. The Rev E has a little bit more low end, a bit thicker sounding, whereas the Rev A has a little bit more saturation, a bit more emphasis on the mids. So for this song, let's grab the Rev A, get a little bit of extra grit on the vocal. I'm going to put the attack at 3, release at 7, 4 to 1, and I'm going to show you what it sounds like when we change ratios here. Because without getting too technical about it, you can also think of your ratios as a way of shifting the tone of your source that's running through the compressor as well. So the higher ratios have a bit of a brighter sound, whereas the lower ratios are a bit smoother and a bit warmer sounding. So as you go up through those ratios, you can hear the compression starts to work a little bit different. The higher the ratio, the more the sound is staying really consistent. The compression is really grabbing onto it and holding it in place. Now, the 4 to 1 ratio is a nice, gentler sounding compression. And as you move up to something like 12 to 1, you can hear that the vocal sounds a little bit crisper, a little bit brighter, and very consistent. I know there's a lot of producers out there who love 12 to 1 on vocals, so it really depends what sound you want as to what kind of ratio. I tend to find myself on 8 to 1 on a lot of stuff. It keeps the vocal up nice in front, has a nice character to it without being too crispy. Really gets the vocal under control, up front, sounding great. We're going to jump into a different project for this one, just so I can show you how an 1176 works with an acoustic guitar. Now for me, I don't love to use heaps of compression on acoustic guitar. You probably heard me say that before, but I will use a bit more compression on an acoustic guitar in a dense mix where you need to get that guitar to come through more. It can work really well. So we've got an acoustic guitar that's a fairly driving sound in this mix. Let's have a listen to it without compression on it. So you get the idea. It gets a little bit lost in the mix. The palm muting doesn't really stay consistent. It sort of comes in and out. So we need to kind of like rein this in a bit. So we've just got our Rev E, and we're going to use what's known as the Dr. Pepper setting. So we've got attack on 3 and a release on 5. This is just a really nice, gentle 1176 compression setting. When you have the fast release on acoustic guitars, it just sounds pumpy to me. You can just hear the guitar just being released, and I don't like the sound of that. Having this kind of slower attack, slower release, we're just kind of massaging the sound, and it creates a nice even sound without it being aggressive. How much better is that? You can hear all the nuances in the playing, and then when the chorus hits, you can still hear the acoustic guitar. It doesn't get buried in that dense mix. So a really great setting for acoustic guitars if you don't want aggression. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I hope it gave you some inspiration for how you can use and apply 1176 compression in your mixes. Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, drop a comment below. All that stuff really helps the video do well with the YouTube algorithm, and I really appreciate that. Make sure you check out the description link below if you want to support the channel. Go over to my website and check out my range of drum samples, grab a copy. That would be a massive support as well. If you guys are keen to stick around and watch another video where I show you the processing on my mix bus, make sure you follow that video that's up on the screen right now.